Up with me this morning, Mike Pesca, host of the daily news podcast, The Gist, the first daily news podcast, I will point out. From Slate, the author of the book Upon Further Review. Danielle Moodie Mills hosts the Democracy-ish podcast. And Joyce Vance is a former U.S. attorney. She is now an MSNBC contributor. And with us from Washington, Andrew Desiderio. He covers Congress for Politico. Andrew, another one of these weekends where there is action on Capitol Hill. Usually clears out on Friday, but you've had staffers and lawmakers up there going through these reports, getting ready for that hearing tomorrow. Set the table for us. What happens at 9 a.m. and how have they been preparing?
That's right. So all weekend, David, House Judiciary Committee Democrats have been meeting behind closed doors, not only to strategize about tomorrow's presentation of evidence, but also, I'm told, to discuss potential articles of impeachment. There are three potential ones they're looking at. The first two are pretty obvious. Number one is abuse of power related to the Ukraine matter. Number two is obstruction of Congress, which is, of course, the president's refusal to make witnesses available and to turn over key documents to Congress. The third issue, which remains murky right now, is this idea of whether anything from the Mueller report and the obstruction of justice evidence will be looped into this process somehow, whether it's as its own article or whether it could be just sprinkled throughout the articles. And that's something that Democrats are talking about and strategizing amongst themselves. Obviously, as we've heard in recent days, many moderate and swing district Democrats are very uncomfortable with this so-called kitchen sink approach, this idea that you would throw all of the president's alleged misdeeds and alleged misconduct into these articles of impeachment, including everything from not just Mueller and Ukraine, but also emoluments and self-dealing allegations as well. Moderate Democrats and swing district Democrats are nervous about that approach. So we should learn more in the coming days about what Democrats are actually going to do. But that's one of the things they're talking about behind closed doors, I'm told, this weekend.
Joyce Vance, to that point, we saw Congressman Jamie Raskin there, sans cravat, no tie there, as he made his way around the House grounds this weekend. He made this point about a pattern of behavior. He was responding to what Larry Tribe had written in the Washington Post, saying it's essential that these documents show that. Where do you stand on that? As you see this singular focus on that phone call, on the behavior surrounding Ukraine, but as you listen to the hearings that have taken place, a renewed interest in what Bob Mueller wrote in that second volume of his report.
So this is a conflict that prosecutors face every time they do a complicated white-collar or public corruption case. There are always people who want to get every last bad act that a potential defendant did, and others who think about the ultimate goal in a criminal trial, which is convincing a jury to convict and convincing everyone on the jury to convict on at least some counts. So it's sort of a head versus heart issue as we look at Trump. And the problem is he's done so many things that are truly awful, right? That none of this is surplusage. In a normal administration, all of this would amount to impeachable conduct. It would be heinous. But here with Trump, I think Democrats will ultimately have to let their heads rule. They will have to pick the worst events and go forward. I think it may be helpful, though, to go back to the Mueller investigation and include a count of obstruction for this reason. The president continues to complain about the process, calling it a witch hunt, calling the process unfair. It's important for the Democrats to point out that the president has not played in good faith in the process, that he's withheld documents in the Ukrainian incident, hasn't let witnesses testify, and that as far back as Mueller, he was obstructing justice and blocking the process.
Mike Pesca, how is the integrity of the framework for this process at this point? I look at this report, all 55 pages that we see from the House Democrats. Talked to Cass Sunstein yesterday about the historical precedent for all this. I know you and I have talked about reading Brenda Wineapple's book on the Johnson impeachment, so you're steeped in the history here. How much has that imposed itself on this process, and how structurally sound do you think the Democrats are here going into this?
I think it's quite sound, and I think no matter how sound or unsound, and again, I think it's sound, that Republicans will pretend it's a flimsy house. But to me, it's, you know, a very sturdy A-frame that can sustain a number of earthquakes. Joyce, you said something that's interesting, though. I want to ask you about this. So prosecutors have this tension. Let's not overcharge. Let's try to convince a jury. Let's be practical. But they've never faced a situation, a prosecutor doesn't face a situation where the jurors are known beforehand and it's overwhelmingly unlikely that the jury will convict. Plus, there's a really good argument for impeachment, which is that even if the Senate does acquit the president, it's an act of civic hygiene. It's planting your flag and saying this is wrong. So because, and I'll add a third thing, which is there's not an analogy, there's not a great analogy between the actual criminal process and this, and the Republicans bring up bad points all the time about why there should be an analogy, like we get to cross-examine the witnesses and hearsay doesn't matter. So adding that all up, isn't there a good argument for doing a wider impeachment just based on the fact that it really isn't like a criminal case?
So, you know, in the immortal words of Lindsey Graham,
right.
impeachment is about
Immortal,
cleansing
yes.
the office, right?
Right.
It's not a criminal process, and it's important that we say that. The interesting reason to analogize to the criminal process is because that sets a much higher bar, a bar Republicans have tried to set. Clearly, these facts meet even that. To your point, though, about who do you have to convince, I think that there are two juries here. There's the Senate, and we know where they're headed. There's also the American people. That, I think, is the more important jury here, and it's why the narrative has to be tailored.
Okay.
Danielle, I want to ask you just about the level of coordination between leadership, the chairs of these committees, the members of these committees as well. Maureen Dowd with a wonderful line about the House Speaker in her most recent column. She wore white and she saw red. You know, as I talked to Jamie Raskin, the congressman from Maryland, he spoke to this. This is a top-down approach. She's been integrally involved. Cheryl Gay Stolberg was on with us yesterday. In her piece, she writes that Adam Schiff's opening statements were line-edited by the Speaker of the House. Talk a bit about the effectiveness of this. She came to this process not unwillingly, but reluctantly, I think we can say, and now she is taking this outsized role.
Yeah, anybody that has ever been following me on Twitter or anywhere knows that I have gone after Nancy Pelosi over this over the course of months, waiting for this moment where she was going to show why she was named Speaker again. And she has now. And the idea here is that Nancy Pelosi, when she had said many months ago, the president is basically becoming self-impeachable, she was waiting for the Ukraine phone call. She was waiting for this administration to become so emboldened that they were going to overstep their bounds, that they were literally going to hang themselves. And so I think here, what's really exciting about where Nancy Pelosi is and where the female Democrats are, is that they are showing their power. All of the people that have testified in the hearings that have been substantial witnesses have been women. Nancy Pelosi here is saying, look, I was waiting for a stack of evidence, things that the American people actually can't turn away from. We're not looking just at one thing. We're looking at a cornucopia of illegal activity. Like, it is unreal, the amount of things that this administration has done and the lengths that Republicans will go through in order to defend him. And so right now, Nancy Pelosi is doing exactly what she should be doing. When she called out that reporter the other day and said, how dare you say to me that I hate the president of the United States as a Catholic, as this person, like, this is about the Constitution. When she says those things, the American people listen. And look, also the fashion, very real, very important. I say that as a woman that always how we look, how our hair is presented in politics matters. But the idea of the purity, the idea of the power of it. If you remember, Hillary Clinton also wore a full white suit at the Democratic Convention. It shows women's power. And it reminds us, you know, about the fact that women had to fight for the right to vote. And here she is wielding the most important gavel at this time.
Andrew Desideri, I'm going to quote from Todd Purdom, who wrote for The Atlantic. He said, her mournful countenance made it clear Nancy Pelosi has at last found herself just where she never wanted to be, leading an impeachment of President Donald Trump that has drawn nary an ounce of bipartisan backing in Congress, has fixed in place public support of about 50%, and seems all but certain to end in acquittal in the Republican-controlled Senate. But Pelosi also seems to have wound up just where she expected to be, and with the full House poised for an impeachment vote by Christmas, she seems resigned to her fate. We were talking just a moment ago about her as the public face of all of this. Speak to the integral involvement that she has had, though, shaping the way that this has worked its way through the House over these last few weeks.
That's right. You mentioned before that she was, you know, sort of line editing every line of Adam Schiff's statements. Same with Jerry Nadler. Same with the other committee chairs. She has really ruled this process with an iron fist to the point where I talk to rank and file Democrats who come out of closed door meetings and they still don't know really what's happening because everything comes out of Speaker Pelosi's mind and she is strategizing this with her chairman. I was told that the morning she made this announcement on Thursday morning when she announced that the House was actually going to move forward with articles of impeachment, that even her key chairman didn't know until a few minutes before. I remember that morning when we got that press release at 5:30 a.m. saying Speaker Pelosi was going to give a statement on the status of the impeachment inquiry. Obviously, we don't know, we didn't know in the moment what that could be. My colleagues and I were texting various lawmakers, various aides. Nobody had any idea what she was going to say. And that's exactly what Nancy Pelosi wants. That's how she wants to sort of be handling this process. And it's a reflection of the fact that she didn't want to be be here in the first place. And now that she is here, she's going to have it her way.
Andrew Desiderio, one half of the journalistic partnership of Desiderio and Cheney, that being one Kyle Cheney, who's joined us on the show many times over these last few weeks as well, doing great work
David.
for Politico.